It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here, the last seconds of the countdown. All the communications between the shuttle and mission control indicated everything was going fine.
January 28th, 1986, started like any other launch day, but ended with a burst of fire that shocked a nation. What if the real story wasn't just about the explosion, but what came after? The haunting silence, the desperate search beneath the waves, and the secrets hidden deep below. This is a journey into the unexpected aftermath that no one was prepared to witness.
It was, as NASA says, a nominal liftoff. It was a brief voyage for the Challenger. It was a heart-stopping tragedy.
Through recovered footage and painstaking investigation, we uncover not only the technical failures, but also the resilience and bravery of the Challenger crew. Their story didn't end in the sky. It was carried in fragments across the ocean and etched forever into history. The day that changed everything. January 28, 1986, began with a striking sense of promise and anticipation. The sky above Cape Canaveral was a crisp, electric blue, a perfect winter morning that seemed destined for history. Families gathered in the bleachers of Kennedy Space Center, bundled against the cold, waving American flags as cameras captured the moment. Across the country, millions of classrooms tuned in, ferried by the hope and innocence of a rare event. A teacher was going to space. Krista McAuliffe, a social studies teacher from New Hampshire, became the symbol of this mission, embodying the dreams of countless Americans captivated by space exploration. The crew surrounding McAuliffe was a blend of NASA's finest: Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialists Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, and payload specialist Gregory Jarvis. Each brought experience and expertise, ready to push the boundaries of human achievement. As the clock ticked down, the roar of engines against the cold air rippled through the ground, shaking the earth beneath spectators' feet. Challenger lifted off with a radiant streak against the pale morning sky, its ascent seemingly flawless for the first 73 seconds. Then, without warning, everything changed. A flash lit the sky, blooming into a searing fireball that twisted the shuttle violently before dissolving into two drifting trails of smoke. For a brief moment, no one could comprehend the horror unfolding. Many spectators and even children watching live broadcasts momentarily believed it was part of the mission, their innocent claps turning to stunned silence. In mission control, the air grew cold with disbelief, broken only by Flight Director Jay Green's somber voice, relaying the chilling words, "Flight controllers here are looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously, a major malfunction." Shock rippled across a nation watching helplessly as the pride of American space exploration vanished in an instant. The bright flare was almost surreal, beautiful to the untrained eye, like a rare celestial event rather than a human tragedy. Hope clung to confusion as the crowd held its breath, expecting the shuttle to re-emerge and continue its climb, but Challenger never recovered. The story that began with such optimism would now unfold in silence beneath the cold Atlantic waters. The first response concealed a more profound enigma. What had finally happened to the crew? Is it possible that someone might have lived through that dreadful instant? Even while the shuttle's burning remains were spread over an area of the ocean equal to 200 to 260 square miles, questions kept coming up. Not only was a spacecraft lost, but also an episode of human dreams abruptly ended. The heaviness of this truth placed us on the verge of a long and painful truth, which, at the beginning, was hidden from the public. The calamity was live-streamed, but what followed was not grasped immediately. The public witnessed fire and smoke, but the following event under the ocean was going to be a secret known to very few people. It was a tragedy with a lot of unknowns, and the full measure of it would have to be discovered through the slow and very careful works of search, recovery, and investigation. So, the immediate sorrow was turned into a sad but necessary mission, which was not going to be limited to the skies, but would also reach the ocean floor. This incident was not only an accident, but also a story in progress, a riddle waiting for solvers. The Challenger's destruction day not only altered the future of space exploration, but also changed the nation's approach towards loss and responsibility. In the very first moments, the ground was prepared for a more thorough examination of the explosion's brilliant flame, towards the darkness that was left behind. The events of that January morning still echo across decades, reminding us not only of what was lost, but what was left behind, in debris, memories, and shattered dreams, beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The moment of disaster. The cause of the Challenger tragedy boiled down to a failure as small as it was critical. A frozen rubber gasket known as an O-ring. In the pre-dawn chill, temperatures had fallen drastically, stiffening the O-ring seals designed to contain searing gases inside the shuttle's right solid rocket booster. These rings were never meant to withstand such cold. When the shuttle lifted off, the brittle gasket failed to provide a proper seal, allowing hot gases to escape through a joint that was never engineered to leak. Less than a second after liftoff, a brief but telling plume of smoke was captured on camera, a warning sign unnoticed by most watching. This early fissure was a harbinger of the catastrophic failure that would come a little over a minute later. As the shuttle soared into the sky, the escaping flame burned relentlessly, slowly eating away at the protective casing of the booster joint. NASA engineers later confirmed this silent damage was expanding moment by moment. At precisely 73 seconds into flight, the weakened seal finally surrendered. A jet of flame burst through the joint, striking the massive external fuel tank containing over 1.5 million pounds of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. This ignited the tank's volatile contents, triggering a devastating explosion at approximately 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The fiery breakup was witnessed live by millions, marking America's first in-flight space disaster. The shuttle did not explode as a single unit, but rather disintegrated rapidly under intense aerodynamic forces. The external fuel tank ruptured and ignited, creating an enormous fireball that no structure could survive. Pieces of the shuttle tore apart, scattering over a wide area. The stark contrast between the shuttle's graceful ascent and its violent end only deepened the shock and confusion. In the immediate aftermath, the question on everyone's mind was whether the crew survived the initial explosion or were lost instantly in the inferno. NASA's initial statements were cautious yet hopeful, but the cold reality was far grimmer. The shuttle was not equipped with parachutes or emergency escape systems. No beacons transmitted from the crew compartment. Only debris floated alongside the pale trails of the still-burning solid rocket boosters spinning helplessly in the sky. News anchors stopped mid-sentence, the broadcast giving way to stunned silence as the magnitude of the disaster unfolded. Rumors and theories swirled. Had the orbiter broken apart but remained largely intact? Could anyone inside have survived the breakup? For hours, the nation grappled with questions that had no immediate answers. This moment forever altered the trajectory of NASA and public perception of spaceflight. What began as a routine mission had uncovered vulnerabilities that no one wanted to face. Behind the horror lay a complexity of human and technical failures, waiting to be unraveled piece by piece. The scene of destruction, despite its chaos, was only the visible start of a much longer and more haunting chapter. Initial chaos and confusion. As the shuttle vanished from the sky, Mission Control descended into tense silence and controlled panic. Data screens began to flicker with static. Telemetry signals dropped out, and communication loops overlapped incomprehensibly. Years of rigorous training taught controllers to wait for confirmation before drawing conclusions. But deep in their hearts, many feared the worst. Every moment stretched unbearably as uncertainty gnawed at the team. Outside, families of the astronauts watched the smoke twisting into eerie, drifting shapes. Whispers filled the air. Was this the shuttle separating as planned? Or something far worse? For seconds, hope clung to confusion like fragile threads, but reality soon tightened its grip. The truth of the disaster was too devastating to accept immediately. Meanwhile, newsrooms across the country struggled to find words, often falling silent or repeating the phrase, "major malfunction." NASA officials faced cameras with pale faces, asking for patience as emergency procedures began. The official line promised search and rescue operations, but inside the agency, many silently doubted survival chances. The forces that tore Challenger apart at nearly 48,000 feet were immense and almost unimaginable. There were no emergency measures for the crew, no ejection seats, no survival beacons, no parachutes. All that remained were scattered fragments and burning boosters trailing pale smoke trails across the sky. Within an hour, NASA proclaimed an emergency and immediately organized a huge search and rescue operation. The Navy vessels, Coast Guard ships, helicopters, and planes all flew to the area where the debris had fallen. The initial hope, albeit very faint, was soon overrun by the grim reality of death as the search transformed into recovery. Crews tried to find for hours over the cold Atlantic Ocean any sign of the astronauts, a blinking beacon, a flotation device, or anything else. The ocean's surface, in the meanwhile, was already covered with pieces of insulation, burnt tiles, and twisted metal, each one of them silently reminding of the great loss that had taken place. When night came, the ocean around was so calm that it almost seemed to be laughing at the tragedy with its weird calmness.
A developing story here tonight. Two divers working for the History Channel have made a shocking discovery off the coast of Florida. The divers were looking for World War II plane wreckage when they found a piece of the Challenger.
The small pieces of debris that were illuminated by the light from the ships looked like they were quietly moving in the dark, while the divers were getting ready for a tricky descent into the dark and muddy water. The ocean floor was the hiding place of a shattered dream. The control room for the mission was filled with a dark mood already, where the joyful spirit of the liftoff had been. Data engineers were reviewing the telemetry very carefully, retracing the last pulses of it, the digital heartbeat that had stopped so suddenly. The change was enormous. The purpose of the mission was turned from discovery to mourning, and the real tale was buried, waiting to be uncovered, below the waves. As the search expanded and the wreckage scattered, the world braced for the discoveries still to come. The search begins. As the horrifying reality of the Challenger disaster settled in, an urgent and massive search effort sprang to life across the Atlantic. Orders flowed swiftly from Mission Control in Houston and Coast Guard stations along Florida's coast. Navy ships, Coast Guard cutters, and Air Force helicopters from Patrick Air Force Base rapidly deployed, converging on the last known location of the shuttle's ascent. What had started as a mission to find survivors quickly turned into a desperate race against time to locate any sign of the crew or the craft's remnants. There was a faint, flickering hope that the crew compartment, the reinforced section housing the astronauts, might have separated intact, and that some individuals could have survived the explosion momentarily. Teams scoured the ocean's surface, combing for life rafts, emergency beacons, or even an orange flight suit floating amid the debris. The seas were dotted with vessels and aircraft systematically scanning in grid patterns, their crews bracing against the cold winter sun while keeping their spirits tethered to fragile optimism. On television screens across the nation, news anchors struggled to find words. NASA officials briefly appeared, their faces pale and unreadable, urging patience while promising the search was underway. Behind the scenes, however, confidence was absent deep within the agency. Experts understood the brutal forces that had shattered the shuttle hundreds of miles above the ocean. The chances of survival were slim to none, but protocol demanded the search continue until all hope was extinguished. Through the afternoon, floating debris began to surface. Insulation from the shuttle's exterior, scorched heat shield tiles, and torn panels from the fuselage. Gradually, the scattered pieces drifted miles apart, carried by wind and ocean currents. The initial surge of rescue had begun to slowly turn into grim recovery. The weight of realization settled heavily on every team member involved. That evening, the Atlantic presented a stark contrast to the chaos above its surface. The ocean was unnaturally still, its dark waters reflecting the searchlights of ships, illuminating tiny fragments bobbing quietly in the darkness. Divers entered the cold water, marking each find with fluorescent dyes and floating buoys. The watery depths below held the secrets of that devastating morning, silent and untouchable by light. By nightfall, reports reached Houston. The debris field spread across hundreds of square miles, with no signals or survivors detected. The same room that had erupted with cheers just hours earlier was now steeped in solemn hush. Engineers and controllers replayed launch data, trying to piece together every moment before the final breakup. On monitors, telemetry flickered and then faded, the spacecraft's digital heartbeat cutting out mid-pulse. What began as a mission of exploration had transformed into a race against despair. Those gathered around monitors and radios were acutely aware that beneath the waves, Challenger waited, a silent witness to a story no one was yet ready to read or accept in full. Across the country, the hopeful faces from the morning faded into shadows of grief and unanswered questions. The coming days would test the limits of technology and human endurance alike, revealing more of the tragic aftermath piece by piece, discovering the debris field. In the days that followed, the Atlantic Ocean became the stage for one of the largest recovery operations in American history. What began as a frantic search for signs of life evolved into a painstaking mission to collect and catalog every piece of the shattered shuttle. The U.S. Navy took the lead, deploying advanced sonar ships, deep-sea submersibles, and dive teams to meticulously map the ocean floor. Helicopters circled overhead, photographing floating debris, while Coast Guard vessels gathered everything they could, from insulation and scorched wiring to fragments of the shuttle's distinctive white tiles. Handling an operation of such complexity required coordination on a massive scale. NASA formed a specialized search, recovery, and reconstruction task force that brought together engineers, military personnel, scientists, and civilian contractors. The vast area was divided into grid sections, ensuring methodical coverage and minimizing the chance of missing critical evidence. Despite the scale, conditions underwater were brutal. Visibility rarely exceeded a few feet, and cold, murky currents slowed every dive, turning recovery missions into fragile dances beneath the waves. Beneath the surface lay a grim metallic landscape scattered with remnants of the shuttle. Pieces varied in size, from as small as a hand to large sections the size of automobiles. Each fragment held a story. Sections of the left wing, landing gear struts, and parts of the external fuel tank. Recovery teams found themselves confronting not just the wreckage of a spacecraft, but remnants of human ambition broken apart by fatal forces. By early February, thousands of pieces had been lifted from the sea, totaling over 100 tons, nearly half the shuttle's original mass. The recovered fragments were transported to a vast hangar at Kennedy Space Center, where engineers laid them out on the floor like an enormous and complex jigsaw puzzle. Using carefully constructed steel frames, they began reconstructing the outline of Challenger, marking each piece's original position based on shape, burn patterns, and soot markings. Forensic engineers very thoroughly examined the parts, studying angles of fractures, colorations of burns, and deformations to take the disaster back to the last moments of flight. The shattered remains gave a clearer picture not only of the explosive event, but also of the silent, slow-moving failures that had already taken place earlier. The evidence implicated the O-ring's failure as the triggering incident, which gave a jet of flame the chance to enter the fuel tank and cause the disastrous fireball to ignite. Still, among the pieces and patterns of the investigation, one very important section was completely missing, and that was the crew compartment. The core of the shuttle, where 7 human beings had taken off on their voyage to space, was not there. Its presence had already been forgotten, and it was just the investigation that was haunted by its absence and pushed the search deeper into more dangerous waters. The Atlantic Ocean, which is located off the coast of Florida, is very deceivingly shallow, with a depth of about 100 feet. But at the same time, it is very complicated with a lot of silt and cold currents that make it very difficult for both sonar and divers. Sonar operators and deep-sea submersibles were constantly following every weak ping, observing outlines that were partly buried in sand and shadow. The waiting was torture, and the replies were just out of reach, underneath the black and silent water. Every piece that was retrieved only added to the enigma. The dislocated fragments gave a narrative of the disaster and of the breakdown of the system, but the genuine last seconds of the crew would still be caught in the depths until the quest for the most profound and somber discovery was completed. The ocean was silent, and those who were searching in its depths were prepared for what was next. As the ocean reluctantly surrendered its secrets, the world prepared for revelations that would forever redefine the tragedy's aftermath. The lost crew compartment. Weeks into a vast and relentless search, the absence of the crew compartment hung heavily over the investigation. This was the heart of the Challenger, the area that carried the 7 astronauts, and its missing presence created a haunting void. Recovery teams expanded their efforts, scanning deeper and more meticulously with sonar equipment, searching the ocean floor off Florida's coast, where waters hovered around 100 feet deep. The combination of cold, murky currents and thick silt veiled the seabed, turning each sonar ping into a tense moment before divers or submersibles could investigate. On March 7, 1986, over a month after the tragedy, the USS Preserver's sonar finally picked up a contact unlike any before. The large, irregular shape was partially buried in sand nearly 18 miles east of Cape Canaveral. As divers descended into the murky depths, guided by powerful floodlights, an eerie silence filled their headsets. What emerged was not just another fragment or piece of twisted metal, but the forward fuselage, the crew cabin itself. The realization struck with a somber finality. What had been whispered about for weeks was now real and impossible to ignore. The discovery marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. This was no random wreckage. It was the protected space where the astronauts sat during their final moments. Though heavily fragmented and crushed by ocean impact, Enough of the cabin remained intact to reconstruct the events of the tragedy's closing seconds. Recovery teams handled the cabin with profound care and respect, viewing it not as debris, but as sacred ground. Every cable fastened and flotation device attached was a quiet act of tribute. Once aboard the recovery ship, strict orders sealed off the area from press and outside eyes. The ship's decks fell into a hush as the reality of the fragile cargo seated heavily on those present. The condition of the crew compartment told a grim story, much of it crushed by the ocean's force, yet structurally intact enough to trace its path. Investigators confirmed the crew module had separated during the explosion, traveling on a ballistic arc for nearly 2 minutes before crashing into the ocean at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The aftermath wasn't just technical, it was deeply human. The cabin was transported, guarded to Kennedy Space Center, where engineers, forensic specialists, and pathologists undertook the difficult task of reassembly, piecing together scorched fragments and shattered components. Their goal was deliberate and somber, not to assign blame, but to uncover the crew's last moments and bring closure to those who awaited answers. The atmosphere inside the hangar was heavy with reverence and grief. As the crew cabin was reconstructed, the intense work revealed haunting details about the final seconds aboard Challenger telemetry data. Launch footage and hardware combined to provide a frame-by-frame narrative. The right solid rocket booster, compromised by a leaking O-ring stiffened by cold temperatures, had started leaking hot gas at liftoff, a small flame flickering along its side. This leak expanded, culminating in the catastrophic blaze at 73 seconds. Yet, inside the crew cabin, data suggested the astronauts were alive, though likely unconscious within moments due to rapid decompression.
The Challenger disaster shocked the world on January 28, 1986. 73 seconds after taking off from the Kennedy Space Center, the spacecraft erupted.
Recovered control panels showed switches moved, indicating attempts to activate emergency systems. Commander Scobie and pilot Michael Smith appeared to have tried, but the shuttle lacked ejection seats or any escape module. The cabin's fall was inevitable, an unresolvable descent into the unforgiving ocean. Impact data confirmed the cabin's destruction at nearly 200 miles per hour, a force beyond survival. The room where NASA leadership received this information reportedly fell silent, the weight of preventable loss settling heavily. The silent courage of 7 astronauts facing the impossible would resonate far beyond that hangar, shaping how America understood the tragedy and its aftermath. Inside the recovery process. With the crew compartment aboard, the mission shifted from recovery to an intensely personal undertaking, honoring the lives lost through meticulous examination. Inside a secured facility at Kennedy Space Center, NASA officials, military pathologists, and forensic experts worked quietly, away from public scrutiny. Under harsh floodlights, fragments of the compartment were handled delicately, each piece catalogued with reverence and respect. This was not a standard engineering operation. It was an act of humanity. Among the wreckage, divers had reported discovering possible human remains. Though fragile and often mingled with shuttle components, these fragments held the memory of those who perished. The violent breakup and ocean impact had rendered preservation nearly impossible. Weeks underwater exposed the remains to salt water, pressure, and corrosion. Identifying individual fragments was a painstaking and heart-wrenching process. Procedures for handling remains followed strict military protocols, emphasizing respect and dignity. Photographs were never released. The entire operation was quietly shielded from media exposure. NASA consciously chose to protect the privacy of the families, treating recovery and examination as a sacred responsibility rather than spectacle. Months later, the Rogers Commission acknowledged that remains had indeed been recovered, but withheld many details out of compassion. In 1986, forensic technology was limited. Identification relied largely on anatomical examinations and personal artifacts recovered alongside the fragments. Some remains could be matched to individuals, while others could not be separated. The fragments, impossible to categorize, were ultimately cremated together, an intimate and tragic gesture of unity for the crew lost as one. On the 20th of May, 1986, the collated ashes were laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery under full military honors.
The crews of the two space shuttle tragedies are also commemorated by memorials here in Section 46. The Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial honors the 7 crew members killed when the Challenger exploded in 1986.
A mount of white serves as a marker for their grave and displays the names of Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. The ceremony was intimate, a non-televised event without any public display. The flag was ceremoniously folded, while the families, top officials, and a few astronauts stood together in quiet grief. To the participants in the recovery, it was emotionally exhausting work. The ocean was, for many, viewed in a very solemn way, calm, still, and almost mournful, as if capturing the very essence of its burden underneath the water. Divers and engineers were using the words vigils instead of recovery while describing the operation. Every piece retrieved was a sober reminder of the loss and the human aspiration. The painstaking recovery of Challenger's crew and their final resting place brings into sharp focus both the fragility of human life and the profound respect owed to those who dared to explore beyond our world. Lessons and legacy. The Challenger disaster sparked a profound reckoning within NASA and the broader aerospace community. The tragedy exposed not just a technical failure, but deep-rooted issues in management, communication, and safety culture. Engineers had warned about the O-ring's vulnerability in cold weather, yet their concerns were overridden by schedule pressures and flawed decision-making. The Rogers Commission's report laid bare these shortcomings, describing the disaster as a preventable accident born from normalized risk and questionable judgment. In the aftermath, President Ronald Reagan ordered a temporary halt to the shuttle program, setting in motion a comprehensive overhaul. NASA undertook extensive redesigns, particularly of the solid rocket booster joints, to prevent another O-ring failure. Launch protocols were re-examined and rewritten, emphasizing rigorous safety checks over timetable demands. The agency also restructured its decision-making hierarchy to empower engineers and reduce managerial gatekeeping that previously stifled critical voices. This transformation aimed to rebuild trust both within NASA and with the public. Engineers who had once feared speaking up were now encouraged to question every element of the program. Safety became a core value, no longer assumed, but continually earned through transparency and diligence. The lessons of Challenger prompted a cultural shift that resonated across all future missions, shaping the way space exploration was undertaken for decades. When the shuttle fleet returned to flight in 1988, with Discovery's launch, the nation was still healing. The mission opened with a solemn moment of silence, honoring the Challenger crew. Their names became an indelible part of astronaut lore, remembered on every checklist, spoken on every launch pad, and embedded in the DNA of NASA's renewed commitment. Their legacy became a constant reminder of the cost of complacency. Beyond the agency itself, The Challenger tragedy had a lasting impact on how America viewed progress and risk. It reminded the world that exploration is inherently dangerous and must be met with humility. Schools across the country taught the story as both inspiration and solemn warning. Krista McAuliffe's role as a teacher in space symbolized this message. Her planned lesson from orbit, though never delivered, was shared widely as a tribute to curiosity and courage. For the countless divers, engineers, and military teams involved in recovery, the memories remain vivid. Many spoke of the ocean as a quiet witness, calm and reverent, holding the disaster's fragments with a silent dignity. What began as a search for survivors became a vigil for history. Each recovered piece, a testament to human endeavor and loss. These experiences deepened respect for exploration's price and the lives it demands. NASA chose to protect the remains of Challenger with the utmost discretion. The wreckage and crew remains were never displayed publicly, preserved only for research and remembrance. Each year on January 28th, ceremonies at the Space Mirror Memorial honor the fallen astronauts. Family members, astronauts, and officials gather in quiet reflection, reading their names aloud against the whisper of ocean winds, a living memory carried forward by those who remember. The Challenger tragedy forever changed space exploration, teaching hard lessons about risk, responsibility, and courage. Remembering the crew means honoring their bravery and the changes born from their sacrifice. If you found this story compelling, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into moments that shaped history.